I was sitting in a lawn chair, wearing a robe and eating a toaster waffle, while 3 men in tactical vests surrounded my compost bin like it was a ticking bomb. One shouted into a megaphone, "Step away from the water hose, sir." My only thought, is this a raid or performance art? Behind them, Karen stood on my roof with a clipboard and binoculars, yelling something about water displacement crimes and biothermal sabotage. A second later, the drone exploded. Plastic shrapnel rained down into my koi pond, and I still didn't move, because I had questions. Mainly, how did we get from community gardening initiative to airborne HOA surveillance strike? Let me rewind. Before we dive into how my backyard turned into a tactical crime scene, do me a favor. Collision, hit that like button if you've ever battled HOA nonsense. Memo, drop a comment if you've ever been fined for something ridiculous. Bonus points for garden gnomes. And bell, subscribe so you don't miss what happened when they tried to confiscate my hose. You ever step outside your house and get hit with the feeling that something is just off? Not like, oh no, I left the stove on, kind of off. More like, the neighborhood might be staging a low-budget coup, kind of off. That was me. Tuesday morning, 7:14 a.m. I'm barefoot on my porch, sipping a stale cup of coffee from a mug that says, "I compost, therefore I am." The air smells vaguely like damp grass and broken dreams. My neighbor's sprinklers are running on a 3-second delay, which means I get misted every time the head swings past my fence. I don't even flinch anymore, and then I see it. Not the sprinkler. Not the bird that dive-bombed my hummingbird feeder like it owed him money. No, I see her. Karen. Khakis. Pastel windbreaker. Clipboard tucked under one arm like she's about to serve someone a subpoena. The woman's got the gait of someone who considers a grocery store suggestion box a personal mission. She doesn't wave. She never does. Instead, she stops directly in front of my yard. Her eyes laser lock on the corner of my garden. Specifically on a small, red, round thing poking out of the soil next to my compost bin. I squint. It's a mushroom. Correction, it's Gerald. That's what I called it. Anyway, he just showed up a few days ago. Probably spawned by the rich, damp compost I've been building since May. Gerald is weirdly large, bigger than my fist, and bright red like someone dropped a clown nose into the mulch and forgot to pick it up. It's kind of mesmerizing. I took a photo of him last week and posted it to a mycology subreddit. Got 312 upvotes and one very concerned DM asking if I had medical insurance. Anyway, Karen stares at Gerald like he's personally insulted her HOA credentials. I figure she's just in one of her moods again. The same one that had her filing a formal violation notice against my neighbor last month for having an aggressively whimsical garden gnome. Yes, those were her exact words. I sip my coffee. Ignore her. Big mistake. 2 hours later, I find a bright yellow envelope duct taped to my front door. Urgent compliance alert. Category: organic infraction. Possible violation of HOA Environmental Safety Mandate 3.14.2b. Suspected unregulated fungal growth detected on Lot 22. Preliminary classification: biological contaminant. Immediate remediation recommended. Signed, Karen D., HOA President, Community Wellness Liaison, and Compliance Officer, acting. I stared at it for a long time, not because I was surprised, but because it was printed on glitter cardstock. There's a kind of existential dread that sets in when you realize someone just accused your mushroom of being a biological threat, and did it using craft supplies. I pulled out my phone, took a picture of the letter, texted it to my brother with one word, Karen. He sent back a gif of an exorcism. So I did what any rational, mildly annoyed person would do. I printed a new sign for the compost bin. Gerald, not for consumption, not for compliance. I even laminated it. Thought it would be funny. Karen did not think it was funny. That evening, she showed up again, this time with 2 other board members, Doug, who wears socks with Crocs, and Mindy, who once called the cops because someone left a beach towel on their railing overnight. They didn't ring the doorbell, didn't knock. They measured my compost bin. Doug had a tiny laser distance measurer. He aimed it like a sniper, jotting notes while Mindy took photos with flash. In broad daylight, I opened the door just as Karen was crouched down, eye level with Gerald. "Is this a joke to you?" she asked, as if I just flashed her in public. "No," I said, sipping from the mug. "Gerald's very serious about environmental ethics." Doug snorted. Karen didn't blink. "You're going to receive an infraction. Possibly several," she said, standing up and brushing imaginary filth off her windbreaker. "This is a Category 3 biological concern. It could attract—" She paused. "Animals." At that exact moment, a butterfly fluttered past. She flinched like it was packing heat. Then she stormed off, muttering something about spores and property values. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because I was worried, I wasn't. Gerald was just a mushroom. The compost was totally legal. And I double-checked our HOA bylaws. Nothing in there about mushrooms or compost bins. But still, something felt off. Because when Karen starts throwing around terms like Category 3 biological concern, it's not about the compost. It's about control. And that's when I realized this wasn't going to stop at Gerald. This was the beginning of something way worse. 3 days after the glitter paper violation notice, I came home from the grocery store to find a plastic flamingo staked into my front yard. That, by itself, wouldn't have been weird. Except this flamingo was holding a tiny laminated sign in its beak. PRE inspection marker. Do not remove. HOA Code 7.6.9 Compliance Coordinate Zone. It also had googly eyes. One was missing. I stood there with a bag of eggs and oat milk in one hand, just staring at it. They were tagging my house. I didn't even know what Compliance Coordinate Zone meant, but the sign had Karen's name on it in sparkly ink and Comic Sans font. So I knew one thing for sure. I was about to get hit with something monumentally stupid. I went inside and checked my email. Sure enough, there it was. Subject line in all caps, Scheduled Compliance Inspection. Your presence is not required but will be noted. Attached, a 7-slide PDF titled Preserving Community Health Through Fungal Vigilance. The first slide was a picture of a moldy sandwich. Slide 2 was a blown-up photo of Gerald. I laughed so hard I spilled oat milk on my countertop. Then I checked the date. The inspection was scheduled for the next morning.
8:30 Uhr morgens sharp.
So I made a decision. If I was going to be dragged into some surreal homeowner witch hunt, I was going to document everything. I set up 2 cameras, one pointing at the compost bin, the other watching the front yard. I even put up a handwritten sign. Smile, you're being filmed. This mushroom is now protected under the Fungal Rights Act of 2023. Hashtag Free Gerald. By 8 a.m., I was parked on my porch with a lawn chair, a bowl of cereal, and a tripod-mounted phone. Duke, my dog, lay at my feet, chewing on a squeaky cactus. The air smelled like wet leaves and the kind of tension that only happens when you know you're about to witness something deeply stupid. At 8:27, I heard the sound. Khakis rustling, clipboards clacking. They were coming. Karen was leading the charge, of course. She wore a reflective vest that said, HOA Enforcement Commander, on the back, and a Bluetooth earpiece like she was coordinating a hostage rescue. Behind her were the rest of the board. Doug, the croc sniper, Mindy, flash happy, and now Janet, new face. Looked like she worked retail but had the posture of a bounty hunter. And then, God help me, they deployed a drone. A freaking drone. It rose into the air from behind Karen like a discount surveillance bot from a low-budget sci-fi show. It buzzed straight into my yard, hovered, rotated once, then parked itself above Gerald's fungal zone like it was ready to drop a tiny missile. Begin documentation, Karen barked. Doug pulled out a measuring tape. Mindy took flash photos, again, in daylight, and Janet began reading from a checklist that included items like visual incongruity, proximity to edibles, and possible animal congregation points. I took a sip of my coffee and waved. Karen didn't acknowledge me. Instead, she turned to Mindy and muttered, loud enough for the mic on my porch cam to catch it, "This is exactly how it starts. First compost, then chickens, then open-air markets. I will not allow this community to turn into a libertarian biofarm." That was when Duke barked. Once, and the drone spun wildly, dipped, and slammed straight into my hummingbird feeder. It exploded like a tiny, buzzing piñata. Gerald remained untouched. Mindy screamed. Doug shouted, "Hostile interference," and tried to cover the bin with a plastic tarp. Janet panicked and stepped directly into my squash patch, crushing 2 baby butternuts. Karen pointed at my compost like she was ordering an airstrike. "Quarantine it. Issue a level 2 infraction. This homeowner has officially entered non-compliant organic management territory." I said nothing. I stood up, walked to the edge of my porch, looked Karen directly in the eye and said, "You've got 30 seconds to get off my property before I go full procedural retaliation." Karen narrowed her eyes. "Are you threatening the board?" "No," I said. "I'm giving you the same courtesy you never offered me." Then I pulled out my phone and hit upload. Video. Edited. Captioned. Shared across my neighborhood's private Facebook group with the title, "My Mushroom versus the HOA. Who will survive?" It got 200 views in 20 minutes. By noon, people were commenting. By 2 p.m., Gerald had a fan page. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that the next escalation wouldn't come from Karen. It would come from someone else entirely. And it would involve hazmat tape, an anonymous tip to the EPA, and a flamingo-based false flag operation. But that's part 3. And trust me, that's where things really get weird. If you ever come home to find a plastic flamingo holding a subpoena, it's either a dream, a prank, or your HOA has gone full insurgency. Mine? It was the third one. It happened the day after the drone crash. I'd spent most of the morning laughing at memes in the neighborhood Facebook group, where Gerald the Mushroom was now officially listed as a local legend, and someone had started printing bumper stickers that said #TeamGerald. That brief moment of joy ended around 3:43 p.m. when I got an envelope shoved under my door. No stamp. No return address. Just one word typed across the top in bold. Environmental Escalation. Phase 2. Inside was a printout of a form titled Emergency Community Cleanliness Initiative, covered in poorly photoshopped logos that vaguely resembled the EPA and Department of Homeland Security mashed together. Below that was a paragraph stating my property had been flagged for Phase 2 environmental hazard processing under HOA Emergency Charter 9A. What is Charter 9A? There is no Charter 9A, because it's made up. But it didn't matter, because at 5:12 p.m., 5 flamingos showed up. Yes, flamingos, plastic ones. They were lined up perfectly along my property line, each with a tiny laminated flag attached to its neck. Zone A, suspected microbial activity. Zone B, unauthorized soil additive use. Zone C, psychological disruption risk.
Zone D, aggressive foliage.
Zone E, non harmonious color palette, moss variant.
I stared at them, unblinking. Then I looked across the street and saw Janet crouched behind her garden archway, holding binoculars and scribbling in a spiral notebook like she was tracking troop movements. Behind her, Karen's Lexus was idling, and I realized what this was. Not enforcement.
Occupation.
Later that evening, I received a new notification, not from the HOA, from the actual Environmental Protection Agency. Apparently, someone, anonymously, submitted a complaint about potentially hazardous mold activity at my address. Said I was harboring a rare, unregulated mycotoxin-producing specimen, and that neighborhood children might be at risk of exposure. They included photos of Gerald, and of me. There was an attachment, a request for inspection, scheduled, pending regional availability, which I knew meant they probably wouldn't show up, but it was real enough to start a paper trail. I checked the complaint's origin. Masked IP. No traceable email. But the phrasing, the legalese, the awkward capitalizations, Karen's fingerprints were all over it. That was when something inside me shifted. Until now, I'd been reacting, defending, blocking punches in a fight I hadn't agreed to. But that EPA letter? That was a weapon. That was escalation. So I did what any rational man would do when threatened by a flamingo-led psychological campaign. I declared war. Phase 1, counter-surveillance. That night, I installed 3 trail cameras. One aimed at Gerald's flower bed. One pointed toward Karen's house. And the third, right above my mailbox, where the HOA liked to leave their glitter rage mail. I zip-tied them to my fence and printed a sign. Warning. You are being recorded. Your clipboard is not a badge. Your flamingos are trespassing. Within an hour, Karen posted a photo of my sign on the community page with the caption, "This is why aesthetic decay must be stopped." Top comment, "Free Gerald." Second comment, "Anyone else see the flamingos glowing in the dark?" Phase 2, the moat. Yes, the moat was real. It started with 6 feet of trench. Originally, I was just going to install some drainage tubing, but the idea started to spiral. I bought a plastic kiddie pool from a hardware store clearance aisle, hooked up a slow drip hose system, and lined the edge with tiki torches and inflatable flamingos. My own flamingos. Rebel flamingos. Then I printed signs for each corner. Zone F, free speech. Zone G, fungal sanctuary. Zone H, tactical compost storage. Zone I, HOA-free territory. I laid lawn chairs across the middle like a bridge. It was absurd. Beautifully, intentionally absurd. And that was the point. Phase 3, the leak. At 3 a.m., I uploaded every photo, every drone clip, every Karen quote, and every false citation I had into a single, glorious Dropbox link titled, HOA Abuse, a case study in mushroom-based madness. I sent it anonymously to our city council's ethics committee. I CC'd the local paper.
IBCC de Karen.
Within 2 hours, my inbox started to ping. By sunrise, a local columnist had messaged me with 5 words. Tell me everything. Over coffee. I didn't know how long I had before Karen realized the trench wasn't for drainage. Before the neighborhood's perfectly aligned bushes started whispering my name with suspicion. Before Gerald, well, Gerald was doing fine. But the flamingos? They were multiplying. And tomorrow would be the day the HOA tried to seize control of my yard by force. Which leads us to part 4, where someone brings a bullhorn, and someone else ends up zip-tied to a hose reel. You ever wake up and feel like the wind smells militarized? I stepped outside at 7:01 a.m., robe on, coffee in hand, expecting to enjoy my morning ritual of watching the squirrels fight over stale bread. Instead, I was greeted by a convoy. 4 white SUVs, hazard lights blinking, no license plates. Each vehicle bore a vinyl decal on the side that said, Maple Grove Compliance Unit, HOA Tactical Division. One guy jumped out wearing a paintball mask, backwards. Another was carrying a clipboard like it was a gun. I counted 7 of them total vests, boots, radios, and not a single ounce of actual authority among them. And then I saw Karen, flanked by Mindy and Janet, walking like she was leading a NATO summit. She was holding a bullhorn. I sipped my coffee and whispered, "Oh, she's lost it." Then the bullhorn squealed to life. Resident of Lot 22, you are in active violation of the Community Environmental Safety Protocol. We are here to neutralize non-compliant zones and restore aesthetic balance. Behind her, Doug yelled, "Target visual acquired." He was pointing at Gerald. Now let me be clear. They were standing in my yard.
No warrant.
No notice. No legal leg to stand on. Just khakis and unearned confidence. So I did what any calm man under siege would do. I walked to the hose, unclipped it, and gave the nearest HOA trooper a direct hit to the kneecaps. He slipped, landed in the moat. The flamingos bobbed solemnly around him. Mindy screamed. Janet shouted, "We need backup," into her walkie, which I'm 99% sure was set to FM radio because I heard faint Celine Dion. Karen, somehow unfazed, barked out a new order. Secure the perimeter. Seize the fungal entity. That's what they called Gerald. The fungal entity. I lost it. I doubled over laughing while water shot out of the hose, soaking 2 more fake enforcers as they tried to climb over my yard gnome army. Yes, by this point I had purchased 12 plastic gnomes and given them all little protest signs. One said, Compost is not a crime. Another, mycelium equals my freedom. Then it happened. The zip tie incident. Doug, soaked, confused, furious, tried to climb the porch to detain me using a set of bright orange zip ties that looked suspiciously like the ones from Home Depot's Halloween sale. Except he didn't see Duke. Duke, my 90-pound Labrador, came bounding out from inside the house like a furry torpedo. He didn't bite, didn't growl. He just barreled into Doug's legs like a linebacker with opinions. Doug went down hard, face first into my rose bush. The zip ties flew from his hand. I picked one up, looked at Doug, looked at the hose reel post, and, well, sometimes justice comes in the form of ironic garden accessories. 3 minutes later, Doug was zip-tied to the hose reel, mumbling something about Geneva Conventions and ornamental shrubbery. Karen shrieked, "This is an act of aggression against the board. You will be fined, cited, and banned from all future HOA-sponsored events." I responded by playing Ride of the Valkyries from a Bluetooth speaker and turning the hose back on. Janet retreated. Mindy cried. Karen stood her ground, drenched but defiant. And then, the drone came back. A new one. Black, sleeker, humming with menace. "Property surveillance activated," said a tinny voice from its underside. I looked up, smiled, pulled out my phone.
Hey Siri. Upolat Foler hat or healthy.
The video went live. Footage of Doug trespassing, Karen giving orders, Janet stomping my squash, and Gerald. Untouched, proud, photogenic. In under 10 minutes, the video had 18,000 views. Someone commented, "This man just invented suburban trench warfare. I salute you." Then came the sirens. Real ones. A sheriff's cruiser pulled up, followed by a second. Karen's eyes lit up with hope. Finally, arrest this man for obstruction, harassment, and unauthorized trench development. But then the deputy got out of the car, saw Doug zip-tied to my hose reel, and sighed the sigh of a man who really wishes he'd become a park ranger. "Sir," he said, walking over to me, "can you explain what the hell is going on?" I pointed at Karen. "Ask her why she brought 7 fake enforcers onto my property without a warrant and tried to abduct my compost bin." The deputy turned. Karen puffed up. "We were enforcing bylaws." "Ma'am," he interrupted, "you're trespassing. You ever sit on your porch, sipping coffee, and think, did I just become the defendant in a neighborhood lawsuit because of a mushroom? Yeah, because I did. It started 4 days after Karen's fake SWAT team was hosed off my lawn. Everything had gone quiet, too quiet. No flamingos, no laminated threats, no HOA reconnaissance from behind Janet's hydrangeas, which was, of course, deeply suspicious. Then came the envelope. Certified mail. Return address. The law office of Kingsley and Meyerhoff PLLC. Inside, a 6-page HOA civil complaint, accusing me of repeated and intentional aesthetic sabotage, creation of a non-regulation perimeter barrier, weaponized organic matter, and my personal favorite, defamatory distribution of mycological propaganda. Karen had filed an official claim in HOA court. Yes, that's a real thing in our community charter. No, I didn't know it existed until now. Apparently, if enough board members agree, they can call a community standards tribunal, basically a homeowner trial, held on someone's lawn, with folding chairs and snacks. The hearing was scheduled for Saturday at 2 p.m. Location, Janet's backyard. When I arrived, the scene was surreal. Rows of HOA members sat in folding chairs beneath a string of white party lights. A plastic podium stood in front of a fake ficus. Karen, in a beige pantsuit and matching neck brace, allegedly due to sprinkler whiplash, stood behind it like she was about to give the State of the Union. On the makeshift judges panel, Doug, still bitter, Mindy, still wet, and a surprised new face, Eileen, an 82-year-old retired librarian with the posture of a question mark and a long-standing vendetta against artificial turf. And then there was me, wearing a t-shirt that said, "Let Gerald grow." Karen called her first witness herself. She claimed Gerald emitted visual aggression, that my trench was an act of symbolic warfare, and that I had incited unrest among the lower shrubbery owners. I countered with time-stamped drone footage, municipal zoning law printouts, and a live Zoom testimony from a local mycologist who called Gerald's species harmless, common, and honestly kind of cute. Then I pulled out my ace, a copy of the HOA charter.
Page 38, section 14D.
Any board action involving private property must be preceded by written consent or a municipal permit if structural entry or modification is involved. I flipped to Exhibit B, the video of Karen's team breaking into my compost bin. Timestamped, unapproved, illegal. Eileen leaned forward. Wait, they entered your yard? Yes, I said. And zip-tied Doug was Exhibit C. The crowd laughed. Karen turned pink. Doug whispered, objection, and Eileen whispered, denied. Then, something unexpected happened. From the crowd, a voice said, I think Gerald's cute. Another, it's a mushroom, not a meth lab. Then Janice, Yoga Pants Janice, stood up holding a homemade candle shaped like Gerald. I made merch, she said. Want one? The tribunal fell apart. Eileen called for an informal vote. All in favor of dismissing the complaint? Every hand went up, even Doug's. Karen stormed out before the final motion could be read. 3 days later, the HOA board stepped down for reorganization. Gerald made the local paper. The headline? Fungus Among Us. How a Mushroom Toppled an HOA President. My inbox flooded with candle requests. The city council quietly launched an audit of HOA funds. Turns out Karen had used the budget to buy drone accessories, faux uniforms, and a fog machine labeled Compliance Theater Effects. Gerald still grows, proud and plump, under a little glass dome I installed over the mulch. A small plaque sits in front. Gerald the Free. May we all be so stubborn. The moat is now a koi pond. Duke naps beside it daily. Janet still watches me from her window, but she now waves. I wave back. Karen? She moved. Last I heard, she tried to run a condo board in Florida and got banned from next door within a week. What started with a compost bin and a mushroom turned into an HOA tribunal, a civil uprising, and possibly the only known case of suburban lawn lawfare featuring aquatic flamingo barricades. Was it ridiculous? Yes. Was it worth it? Absolutely. Because sometimes you don't fight for glory. Sometimes you don't fight for justice. Sometimes you fight for a mushroom. And that, folks, is how a mushroom sparked suburban warfare. A hose became a felony, and a drone met its watery grave. If you enjoyed this chaos, Speech Balloon, leave a comment with the dumbest HOA rule you've ever heard. Fire smash that like button to support independent lawn defense. And mobile phone with arrow, subscribe for the next episode. Karen tries to ban rain. Trust me, it's wetter than it sounds.